Meet the Press Now. I'm Kristen Welker. The longest government shutdown in American history is officially over, but its resolution creates questions about the path forward for both parties. President Trump signed the short-term funding bill last night in the Oval Office, surrounded by Republican allies. Both the president and Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, blaming Democrats for the record-breaking shutdown.
The Democrats tried to extort our country. In just a moment, I'll sign a bill exactly like we asked Democrats to send us all along, many days ago.
I want to say that all this was utterly pointless and foolish. This outcome was totally foreseeable. Democrats admitted that they used the people as leverage, and they got nothing for their selfish political stunt here. They didn't achieve anything with this at all.
The deal only funds the government through January 31st. Leaving open the potential for another shutdown in just a few months. The shutdown and the deal to end it have turbocharged the debate over health care. Despite the Democrats' demands, tax credits for the Affordable Care Act are still set to expire at the end of the year. And there is still no clear path in Congress to prevent that from happening. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries yesterday filed a petition to force a vote on a Democratic plan that would include a 3-year extension of the Affordable Care Act tax credits. Look.
The Republicans have zero credibility on this issue. These are folks, these Republicans, who have tried to repeal the Affordable Care Act more than 70 different times in the last 15 years. There's no evidence that they're serious about extending the Affordable Care Act tax credits.
That's likely a non-starter for Republicans who argue the entirety of the Affordable Care Act, also known as Obamacare, needs overhauling.
I think we ought to fix the problem instead of quit patching it, quit throwing unlimited money at it.
I don't think there's any chance at all Republicans are going to vote for the current insurance subsidy. That's not going to happen. So if you're talking about reform, I think now would be a time to have it.
Our latest NBC News poll shows voters trust Democrats more on the issue of health care, nearly 2-1. And a new AP poll shows 2/3 disapprove of President Trump's handling of the issue. The president, meanwhile, who said he had, quote, concepts of a plan on health care during last year's presidential debate, last night renewed his suggestion of making payments directly to consumers.
I'm calling today for insurance companies not to be paid, but for the money, this massive amount of money, to be paid directly to the people of our country so that they can buy their own health care, which will be far better and far less expensive than the disaster known as Obamacare. I want the money to go directly to you, the people. And you go out and you'll buy your own health insurance and you'll negotiate different plans and you'll get much better insurance and you will be an entrepreneur for yourself.
All of this as the fallout from the shutdown for federal workers and travelers across the country lingers. A White House official telling NBC News it could take until next Wednesday to get thousands of federal workers the back pay they're owed. And flight reductions remain in place all across the country, with the FAA expected to ramp back up to full capacity by the end of the week. Joining me now from Capitol Hill is NBC News senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. NBC's Yamiche Alcindor is at the White House. Also with me is Dr. Ezekiel Emmanuel, a former health policy advisor in the Obama administration and key architect of the Affordable Care Act. Thanks to all of you for being here. Dr. Emmanuel, we will get to you in just a moment. First, let's get to these headlines. Sahil, this only funds the government for a few months. What's to say that we're not back in the same place in January?
Oh, we could certainly end up back at a similar place in January, Kristen. There is that January 30th deadline. A couple of things are different this time. 1/4 of the government is fully funded through next September. That part includes SNAP benefits, so it's not going to be identical. Democrats are holding out the option. They're keeping the option on the table to run this same strategy in January if ACA funding is not extended. But Republicans are just going to call their bluff again. That strategy is not likely to work any better in January as it did this time around, especially after Republicans saw Democrats, being unwilling to stick it out. That the fact that Democrats blinked first is all the lesson Republicans need in terms of how they will, handle this next time around. So could we end up back here? It's possible, but I doubt it. I think Democrats decided to run this play because they thought it could bring Republicans to the table on the issue of Obamacare and the funding. That didn't happen. And by the way, we'll be in the situation with the ACA subsidies will be in a worse place in January because people's bills will already have gone out by then.
Well, it's a great point, Sahil. And of course, House Speaker Mike Johnson has not made any guarantees that he's going to bring health care subsidies to the floor for a vote. So do you have a sense, based on your conversations with your sources there on the Hill, how Democrats plan to force a vote on the issue?
So what they've secured, Kristen, is a promise from the Senate Majority Leader John Thune about holding a vote by the end of the second week of December. Thune has indicated that Democrats can put forward any bill they want. It'll get a vote in the Senate. It needs at least 13 Republicans to get to 60 votes. That is doubtful. And yes, as you mentioned, Speaker Mike Johnson has not made any promises at all of a House vote. So there are many obstacles, in the path to any possible ACA funding extension. And this is why Democrats are furious, because they had the public on their side on this issue. The polls showed that most Americans want to extend this funding. They also had the public on their side when it comes to blame regarding the shutdown. Our poll at NBC and many other polls showed that Republicans and the president were taking more of the blame, which is why I think Democrats are upset at the lesson that they inadvertently taught Republicans. Take a look at what Congresswoman AOC told her colleague Ryan Nobles.
Especially with this administration, my concern is that the lesson that they're learning is that Democrats are weak, and that next time we just need to hurt working people and working Americans more to get them to fold. And I don't want them to learn that lesson, and I want us to be a party that says we're going to get results for people.
And the view of House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries, as he indicated yesterday, is one of two things happen here. Either Republicans relent and accept an ACA funding extension, or Democrats will use it as a political albatross around their necks and hammer them with it in the 2026 elections.
All right. Well, I know you'll be watching all of the twists and turns very closely. Sahil, thank you so much. Yamiche, let me head over to you. The president has floated this idea. He's very critical of Obamacare. He's talked about repealing and replacing Obamacare. He's only said he has concepts of a plan, but he did come forward with this idea of sending payments directly to Americans. Based on your conversations, is anyone giving you any more information about what exactly that means and how exactly it would work, Yamiche?
Kristen, it's a great question, but the short answer is no. There are no details being given. There's no formal plan. And I was struck over the weekend when the president first started floating this idea of giving cash to Americans as a health care policy, that the Treasury Secretary came out and immediately said there's no more formal policy. We're not going to be presenting anything to the Senate. That, of course, is when the shutdown was still going on. So even his own administration and his top officials were making it very clear that they did not actually have a policy in place. I think it's also in some ways really crucial and I think striking when you think about the fact that it's been more than a decade now since President Trump, then candidate Trump, then private citizen Trump was talking about Obamacare, talking about the Affordable Care Act being terrible and that he had his plan, but he has yet to actually come up with a plan, which I think is remarkable when you think about all of this. Kristen.
Yamiche, what are you hearing? Because President Trump had said in the midst of the shutdown that he was, in fact, willing to come to the table to talk to Democrats to try to work something out on health care. Do you get the sense that that's going to happen? Does he have any plans to invite Democrats to the White House, for example, to do exactly that?
From my understanding, there are no plans at this time to invite Democrats to the White House. And I think we can read between the lines in that the president is still pushing for the filibuster to be ended. And for those who maybe aren't all that familiar with the Capitol Hill terms, it's this rule, essentially, this tool where the minority party can hold up any legislation that they oppose. I mean, it needs 60 votes, most legislation in the Senate to pass, which is how we ended up with this 43-day shutdown. The president wants to do away with that rule. Now, senators on both sides of the aisle have been very, very nervous about this and don't want to get rid of it, because once you're in the minority, it then takes away literally all of your power. But the president wants to strip Democrats of just that, all of their power. So that tells you where his mind is when it comes to sort of trying to find any sort of compromise with Democrats, Kristen.
All right, Yamiche, thank you. Please stick around for us. I'm going to come back to you in just a few minutes. I do want to head over to Dr. Emanuel. Dr. Emanuel, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I want to talk about Obamacare, but I have to get your reaction first to this proposal that's been floated by President Trump to send money directly to Americans, effectively scrapping the health care policy that's in place right now. Do you think that's realistic, particularly for people with pre-existing conditions?
Let me say two things. First of all, I want to reemphasize a point just made, that the Republicans had had 15 years since the passage of Obamacare in 2010 to come up with a proposal, and they've never come up with a replacement proposal. They have no idea. So when they say we want to reform the whole system, that's hot air with no substantive proposal there. This idea of we're going to give people money and let them try to fish and figure out what their proposals, what their plans are, is really crazy. Because as you point out, 10% of the population uses 2/3 of all healthcare dollars. Okay, healthcare need is not spread uniformly in the population. Now, you give some people money, and they won't have to use a lot of healthcare services. You give other people who have illnesses, whether it's heart disease or cancer or multiple sclerosis or some serious infections, a set amount of money, and ask them to go get their health insurance or ask them to get their health care services, there's no chance they're going to be able to use insurance money to get enough health care services. I mean, you get cancer, you get breast cancer, and immediately you need about $80,000 worth of treatment between the surgery, the pathology, the scans, chemotherapy. There is no way whatever the government's going to give people is going to cover enough. This is not a plan. It's not even a concept of an idea. So it's just not a non-starter.
Let me ask you about the battle that's going to unfold now. Democrats are arguing they are going to try to force a vote to expand and extend the tax credits, which expire at the end of the year. I guess the question is, open enrollment started November 1st. Is there a point, Dr. Emanuel, at which it almost becomes too late because people's premiums start to go up anyway?
Well, we're looking at premium increases at least in the 20% range for most people, even without the subsidy issue. For many people with the subsidies withdrawn, we're seeing much higher increases, and that's going to discourage people, particularly healthy people, from buying health insurance. And one of the impacts is to drive up insurance premiums even further. I would say, it's never too late. But on the other hand, when people are trying to make a decision as to whether get insurance, what they see today is what's going to determine whether they buy health insurance or not. I think the real issue is Republicans have no ideas about how to make health care more affordable. What the Democrats have to be ready to do is put together a package of, here are the changes we're going to make that is going to make health care more affordable, not just for people in the exchanges. Remember, that's only 24 million Americans. But for all Americans, we need to bring down drug prices. We need to bring down hospital prices or cap hospital prices. There are many policies we can implement. That would be the first phase, make healthcare more affordable. And the second phase has to be, we've really got to get to a well-functioning system with more comprehensive reforms to get to universal coverage, consistently high quality. And I think that two-step process is going to be very important for Democrats to put together those ideas, because they have now made healthcare a major issue. We've got to show, the Democrats have to show that they have solutions to the problem, whereas we know the Republicans have no solutions, no ideas for what the reform should be.
Well, you are, again, one of the architects of the Affordable Care Act. You've said it's a step in the right direction, not a finished product. So to follow up on all of the points that you are making, what exactly should a finished product look like? And is it possible to get Obamacare there without repealing and replacing it?
Look, Obamacare was a very important step in the right direction. We got more than 25 million people health insurance and saved many people's lives that way. We kept healthcare costs actually down for 15 straight years, saving the federal government nearly $4 trillion just on Medicare alone. Those were major achievements. But we're still not at universal coverage or at cost control. I think we have to simplify the system and get a lot more standardization so we don't have as much administrative waste and wasteful use of healthcare resources. There are a lot of particular ideas, can't be summarized in 30 seconds, but I think you need a plan where everyone either gets employer-sponsored insurance or is in an exchange with standardized plans where the different plans compete on the basis of quality, not on the basis of deductibles, not on the basis of co-pays, but on the basis of the quality of care that they provide. That would simplify the choices Americans have to make, and it would also drive us in the right way. To get to that place, you need to change how you pay hospitals. You need to change how you pay doctors. We need to change how we collect quality data and information. There's a lot of comprehensive change. You know, in American history, every time you pass a big healthcare reform like the Affordable Care Act, it takes about 15 years. We've had a remarkable improvement. And then you need your next phase of reform. And we're about 15 years in. It's going to take us, you know, a number of years to get there. That's why phase one, which we have to pass in the next year, is make healthcare more affordable. And phase two is a more comprehensive reform.
All right. Well, Dr. Emanuel, we are going to continue to track all of this. So please come back. Join us again soon. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for this good interview.
We really appreciate it. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. Let's turn back now to the White House, where President Trump held an event this afternoon but did not take any questions after also ignoring questions last night in the Oval Office about his longtime relationship with the late sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, which burst back into the spotlight yesterday when both the Democrats and the Republicans on the House Oversight Committee released documents from Epstein's estate. And as House Speaker Mike Johnson is now promising he'll allow a vote next week on a bipartisan bill that was forced its way to the floor and that would order the Justice Department to release all the Epstein case files. Yamiche is back with us. So, Yamiche, take us behind the scenes. What are the strategy sessions like there at the White House to deal with this latest Epstein issue? And it's my understanding there was actually a meeting in the Situation Room yesterday.
That's right. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt actually acknowledged that there was this White House meeting in the Situation Room, that the president sat down with one of the representatives, Laura Boebert, a Republican who has put her name on the petition to, force a vote on the Epstein files. The House essentially wants to try to force the Department of Justice to release all information it has on Jeffrey Epstein, though you've heard from Attorney General Pam Bondi that there is no new information to release, no client list, she says. That being said, this is a White House that is essentially saying that they are being transparent, that meeting at the Situation Room is part of that transparency. But as you noted, the president has not taken questions on this issue, especially after 20,000 pages of documents were released where President Trump came up multiple times with, at one point, Jeffrey Epstein saying that he had information that could, quote, take down the president. Now, we should underscore that President Trump has not been accused, not been charged of any crimes related to Jeffrey Epstein. He denies any wrongdoing related to Jeffrey Epstein. But this is a White House that has not been able to shake this issue. And they've been able to shake a lot of issues, but Jeffrey Epstein is simply not one of them. You have Republicans, some of the president's most fervent supporters, wanting more information out of this administration. Kristen.
All right, Yamiche, thank you for doing double duty today. We really appreciate it. Good to see you. And coming up, a federal judge weighs whether or not to dismiss the cases against two of President Trump's political rivals by potentially disqualifying the DOJ prosecutor. We're live outside the courthouse next. Plus, one of the House Democrats who voted no on yesterday's shutdown deal will join me in studio. Stay with us. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. And now to an NBC News exclusive. The Trump administration targeting another critic of the president's. One of the White House's top housing officials is asking the Justice Department to open a criminal investigation into Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell over allegations of mortgage fraud. That's according to a person familiar with the referral. Swalwell, who served as an impeachment manager during President Trump's second impeachment trial, would be the fourth Democratic official accused of mortgage fraud in recent months. So far, only one of the four, New York Attorney General Letitia James, has been indicted by a grand jury. Now, this comes on the same day that attorneys for James and former FBI Director James Comey argued in a Virginia court that the federal prosecutor presiding over their cases should be removed from her job. Acting U.S. Attorney Lindsay Halligan was appointed to her post in September, 3 days after acting U.S. Attorney Eric Siebert resigned under pressure for failing to indict Comey and James. Attorneys for Comey and James argue that a U.S. attorney can only serve in an acting role for 120 days without Senate confirmation, and that Siebert's 120-day period should also include Halligan's. NBC News Chief Justice and National Affairs correspondent Kelly O'Donnell joins me now, along with NBC News legal analyst Danny Savalos. Thanks so much to both of you for being here. Kelly, let me start with you. So what's at the center of this case that James Comey and Letitia James are arguing today in court? Kelly, take us behind the scenes.
Well, good to be with you, Kristen. And part of what makes today unusual is that the prosecutions against James and James Comey, so Letitia James of New York and James Comey, were brought together today, combining their efforts to try to disqualify the acting U.S. attorney, the interim, Lindsay Halligan. They also brought in a judge from South Carolina, a federal judge who doesn't have any direct connections here, to try to even things out. So just the setting itself was unusual. And both are arguing that the indictments against them should be dismissed because of this issue of, was Halligan even lawfully in the job? They argued that because the 120-day requirement elapsed and there was no Senate confirmation, that there is another mechanism to appoint a U.S. attorney, and that is the courts themselves, not the president going through and making yet another appointment. And if she is disqualified, it does threaten the two cases, because in both instances, it was Halligan, who had never been a prosecutor before, an attorney, of course, but she presented the information to the grand juries, and she was the only one in the room. And the judge today hearing this case also raised an issue that adds a little mystery to this. She reviewed the grand jury transcripts and found that there was a section of time missing. That becomes important because Attorney General Pam Bondi had separately validated the cases brought against James Comey and Letitia James, saying that she had reviewed it all and that she had properly looked through all of the grand jury. The judge today said, nope, Pam Bondi couldn't have done that because there's a section missing. So it is part of the larger story of, did the White House try to have political prosecutions against perceived enemies of the president? And the defenses joined forces today to say that not only do they believe these cases should be dismissed, they believe the lawyer involved should be disqualified. Kristen?
And Kelly, just very quickly, did the judge give any indication of how she plans to rule?
Yes, we could definitely get a sense of her skepticism through the questioning that she posed to the government lawyers here. She also said she would return a decision before Thanksgiving, so just a couple of weeks for her to consider all these factors.
All right, Kelly O'Donnell outside the courthouse for us. Thank you so much, Danny. Let me turn to you. Let's say that the judge does that Lindsay Halligan was improperly appointed. Would that effectively void the cases against Comey and James? What would the actual implications be?
Well, if that happened, then one of two things happens. The indictment might be dismissed, or it might be dismissed with prejudice, meaning it couldn't be brought again. So the theory of the defense is that, look, if she was improperly appointed and she's the only one who signed the indictment and the only one that appeared before the grand jury, then this is not a valid instrument. This indictment is void. But then they go an extra step and say, in this case, because the government essentially knew what it was doing, because they were engaged in game playing to try and get this indictment of Comey, even when nobody else wanted to do it, none of the career prosecutors, because they've engaged in this obvious gamesmanship, it should be the indictment dismissed with prejudice, meaning it can't be brought again. I have to tell you that even though there is possibly evidence that this was an indictment that was procured by cutting corners and not following procedure, it's really difficult for a court to say, not only is this indictment dismissed, but thou shalt never bring it again.
Is it possible, if this were to be dropped, the Justice Department could bring another indictment?
If it is dismissed without prejudice. And that's often the case. If there's some procedural defect in an indictment, part of a defense attorney's sworn duty is to make life as difficult as possible for the prosecutors within the law. And sometimes that means trying to get an indictment dismissed, knowing that they can really just go back to the grand jury and maybe get that same indictment or a similar indictment with another grand jury, assuming that you have no statutes of limitations issues. But this is the kind of thing that can gum up the process, even if the indictment is not dismissed dismissed with prejudice. And I think if it is dismissed, if you're going to bet, it's likely to be dismissed without prejudice, because courts are really reluctant to tell the government they can never charge this person again because of a procedural defect in the indictment.
All right, Danny Savalas, thank you so much, as always, for your insights. We really appreciate it. Up next, affordability in focus, my one-on-one interview with a House Democrat who's urging her party to fight harder for the issue after she voted, quote, hell no on the deal that ended the shutdown. Keep it right here on Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, the longest government shutdown in history ended last night, leaving some Democrats increasingly frustrated that their efforts did not result in a deal to extend health care tax credits. Joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury of New Mexico. Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining me.
It's great to be here.
It's great to have you here in person. I just want to start off on a human level. How do you feel now that the government is reopened, now that your constituents who are federal workers are getting paid, those SNAP benefits are going out? Is there some relief?
Yeah, I was just saying, I feel relief. I feel like a weight has been lifted. And I know for so many people out there, especially for the low-income residents in my district, all of the chaos, especially around food assistance and SNAP, has been just weighing so heavily on families. I think the end of the shutdown is really, really important. Of course, I'm pissed as hell about how it went down and that we did not address the healthcare crisis. But, New Mexico is one of the highest percentages of both active duty military as well as federal workers. And so the strain on our communities, there's not a single New Mexican that doesn't have a family member or friend who works for the federal government. And I think we're all relieved that people are going to get paid again.
Given that relief, given what your moderate Democratic colleagues are saying, which is effectively that this shutdown was eventually doing more harm than good. Do you acknowledge that? Do you agree with them that it had just dragged on too long?
Well, what I would say in general is that I think all shutdowns are destructive. They are not beneficial for the country, for morale, for our economy. I mean, the multi-billion-dollar losses to our economy. And as I said, the strain that our communities felt is bad. And I think the way in which the White House and the GOP escalated the shutdown and used human lives as collateral, especially, the president demolishing the White House and throwing these parties and then cutting 42 million children off of food assistance. I think that the overwhelming feeling in the United States for the last, 40 plus days was that this was not okay. This was not sustainable. But I do want to say that we are facing a very real healthcare crisis. And, a couple of weeks ago, and I'm hearing from people all over the country that they don't know how they're going to make their mortgages and their rent and put food on the table with the cost of health care going up.
Let's talk about the fight ahead, because Democrats like yourself are demanding that this get addressed, that there is some type of bill that extends Obamacare subsidies. Speaker Johnson has not guaranteed that he will bring that legislation to the floor. How do you make sure that it does, in fact, get a vote? Are you confident it will?
I am not confident at all that it'll get a vote. I mean, I think first and foremost, if we learned anything during the shutdown, it's that the GOP leadership in the White House cannot be trusted. And, even the day after the Senate passed this deal, after there was this pinky swear that they'd hold a vote on health care, they're now talking about abortion bans if we want to extend Obamacare tax credits. So that's the Senate side. But in the House, we are not dealing with serious lawmakers. In the 7 hours of the Rules Committee debate the other night, I sat there while colleague after colleague across the aisle talked about how health insurance is unaffordable, that the system is broken. And I could not agree more. Our healthcare system is completely broken, and I believe in universal healthcare. But do I believe that my colleagues are prepared to actually put their nose to the grindstone and work out a health care deal in the next 2.5 months? I don't think so. I think that they lied in order to get the shutdown over, and I think they're going to continue to do what they've done because they showed us who they are in the big ugly bill, which not only guts the Affordable Care Act, it guts Medicaid and Medicare. And so this is the first of many battles.
Well, Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries has introduced a discharge petition that would extend the Obamacare subsidies for 3 years. I've spoken to some Republicans, Congressman Don Bacon, on this program yesterday, who said that this is dead on arrival. So, first of all, is that something that you support, a 3-year extension? And how do you get it passed?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would rather begin on a provision that is dead on arrival, but stakes out a position that keeps Americans from being dead on arrival, because that is what we're looking at. The loss of health care for 15 million Americans means that people will die. And I know that, oftentimes lawmakers engage in hyperbole, but the entire reason why these subsidies exist is because healthcare is unaffordable. There's no solution to get us over the hump. And so we know millions of Americans are going to lose coverage, which means they go without care. It means they show up for emergency room visits, or it means that people die because they just cannot access healthcare. So not only do I support it, I signed on to the discharge petition. I think it's an important opening offer to our Republican colleagues, and I would like to see my colleagues negotiate in good faith.
As you know, some of your colleagues are calling for Minority Leader Chuck Schumer to step down from his post in the Senate. Do you share that opinion? Do you think he should step down?
I serve in the House. And so I get a vote on who serves as our leadership in the House. I don't get a vote in the Senate. But I will agree that the American people are angry. They feel betrayed. They don't understand the logic of what happened over the last week and a half. But we are where we are. And what I know is that our democracy is on the line right now. And if we don't fight like hell and stay unified, that we could lose our country. And so we're going to keep fighting.
Sounds like you're not prepared to call for him to step down, but are you disappointed in his leadership?
I don't know the full facts of why 8 Democratic senators behind the scenes cut a deal without consulting with the rest of the caucus, but I know that they did. And was I angry about it? Extraordinarily angry. There are literally over 200 plus members of the Democratic caucus. Why were we not consulted? Why was there not a conversation? Why was there not a conversation with the American people? That's what democracy is about. But I don't get a vote in that discussion.
Let me turn to the battle to release all of the Epstein files is now going to be front and center as well. Are you confident that all of the Epstein files will be released?
I am not confident at all. I mean, what we've seen even over the last 24 hours with the president pulling a member of Congress into the White House to try to pressure her to get off of a discharge petition for a vote to release the files tells me everything I need to know, which is that the White House is engaged in a cover-up. And the fact that they did it in the Situation Room means that they're trying to flex their power muscle against members of Congress. And we already know the president is not complying with the subpoena. We know he's trying to cover up the files. And this week, the Oversight Committee released over 20,000 pages of documents in which Donald Trump's name appears over 1,000 times, including in private email correspondence between Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell, in which Epstein literally says that Trump is the dog that hasn't barked, implicating that not only did he spend time with sex trafficking victims, but that he had not essentially ratted them out. So it's very clear that Donald Trump is engaged in some sort of cover-up, and we are going to turn over every stone until we find out what it is.
We should note he has not been accused of any wrongdoing. And actually, the files that were released do not suggest he was engaged in the activity that Epstein was.
But I would like to note, if that's okay, that we have a congressional subpoena to the administration, and he has thus far failed to comply with the subpoena, and that is a criminal act. And so I do think it is wrong for the media or anyone else to absolve the White House from accountability in this case when it's clear that they are actually breaking the law and complying with the subpoena.
Okay, we'll watch to see how it unfolds. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Congresswoman Stansbury. We really appreciate your coming in. We do want to turn now to some news from Senator John Fetterman's office. The Pennsylvania Democrat is under observation at a Pittsburgh hospital after he suffered a fall near his home early this morning. According to his office, the senator had a, quote, ventricular fibrillation flare-up that led him to feel lightheaded and fall. injuries to his face. Fetterman has a history of cardiac issues, and he suffered a stroke during his 2022 election campaign, after which he had a pacemaker defibrillator implanted. In a statement, the senator's office says he is doing well and is grateful to the medical staff for caring for him. We will be right back with more Meet the Press Now.
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive. And there are concepts and options we have to do that. And you'll be hearing about it in the not too distant future.
Welcome back. That was candidate Donald Trump responding to a question about his health care plan during last year's presidential debate. And after 10 months in office, there are still many questions about the president's health care agenda as premiums for millions of Americans are set to rise at the end of the year. Joining me now, Tia Mitchell, Washington bureau chief for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Herbie Zitskind, who served as White House principal deputy communications director during the Biden administration, and Republican strategist Malik Abdul. Thanks to all of you for being here. The shutdown is over, guys. Yes. So federal workers all across the country breathing a sigh of relief, Tia. But this issue at the center of it remains this fight over health care. Democrats are trying to force a vote to extend the Obamacare subsidies. House Speaker Mike Johnson not guaranteeing that that's going to happen. How do you see this playing out?
So there's a lot uncertain because, again, like you said, the Senate has guaranteed a vote by mid-December, but we don't know what they'll be voting on. Republicans that I talk to say we're open to the conversation. We agree that health care is not affordable, but Republicans are divided on the subsidy issue specifically. And when they talk about the bigger issues with Obamacare and health care spending, that's a lot more complicated, and that's not necessarily something that can come together in legislation right away. So we really don't know what's going to come out of this.
Well, Emily, President Trump, you heard there in the campaign, said he has concepts of a plan. He's put forward this plan this week to give people direct payments, but medical professionals, healthcare experts say that it just doesn't work that way because people with pre-existing conditions need more than a one-time payment. Does this start to box Republicans in, that there isn't a plan yet after 10 months of being in office, and people are saying they want their health care to be more affordable?
Well, see, you're starting with just being 10 months in office. I'm talking about just since the Republicans have been talking about the health care plan, and we just simply haven't had one in all of this time. And I've been able to criticize my party in that because you have to have an answer to it when you're talking about health care. It's one thing to talk about Obamacare, but one of the provisions in there that's part of the reason why the costs are going up is because of pre-existing conditions. Well, Trump supports, he did in his first administration, the idea of pre-existing conditions. Republicans are going to have an answer to it, and I think that Mike Johnson is going to have to bring that bill to the floor. He's not going to be able to get away with that because you don't have an answer for something that people are genuinely concerned about.
Herbie, as you see this play out, what do you think this strategy is for Democrats to make sure that it does get a vote?
Well, I think they need to hold the line. You know, this shutdown raised the salience of the healthcare fight. You have Democrats saying we need to fight to extend ACA subsidies. 24 million people would have lower premiums if the Democrats won on that fight. Republicans clearly see this as a problem. And, you know, I've been seeing this for 15 years. I was there when President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act. They still don't have a plan on the other side. And because of the shutdown fight, because of the reluctance to either craft a plan or vote or even get to yes on a vote, this is an issue that is now a big liability for Republicans by the end of this month.
Herbie, respond to that by the end of this month and potentially heading into the midterms because affordability, as we just saw, the top issue for voters, and health care is a big piece of that.
Yeah, it's literally on the ballot. And just last week, I was talking about the anxieties that elected Donald Trump. They haven't gone anywhere. And you can ask yourself whether or not it's gotten better. So a number of these, metrics that we use to talk about just how you personally have benefited from federal government or a presidential administration, that will be on the ballot next year. And Republicans are going to have an answer for it. And we just can't ignore it and act as if it doesn't exist.
Well, Tia, how do you see this playing out on the campaign trail? There may be a vote in the next few months, but this is obviously an issue that Democrats feel is resonating with people all across this country. There is criticism that Obamacare subsidies are not enough, that premiums are too high, that it does need to be revised in some way, shape, or form. But how do you see this playing out on the campaign trail?
So I think Democrats are looking at their loss in 2024 at the presidential level, when Donald Trump was focused very much so on the economy and saying, you don't feel good about the economy. Joe Biden keeps telling you all the economic indicators say things are okay, but how do you feel? And that was a winning message. Then on Election Day, in this off-year election, Democrats had lots of successes because their candidates were focused on lowering costs. And I think Democrats not only want to keep that message going, but they also know that on health care, they tend to have the trust of voters over Republicans, which is why they're going to continue keeping that at the forefront.
Herbie, there's all of this debate inside the Democratic Party about how hard to fight right now, what that should look like. Senator Chris Murphy was just in New Hampshire. He was at a town hall, and he said, I had a colleague tell me I was being too alarmist. I don't think the problem isn't that we aren't too alarmist. We're not alarmist enough. What do you make of that rhetoric? Is that the right message heading into the midterms?
I think, as Tia said, the focus has to remain laser focused on affordability, on costs. This is a major issue now for this president. And Senator Murphy's right. We need to be strong. We need to be, out there on it. But look, this is when it comes to affordability and when it comes to Democrats' message, I think about what we experienced under President Biden when I was working for him. This is not a comms problem. This is a problem. You can't just message your way out of an inflationary context. People feel the pain. If you say things are good, you seem out of touch. If you say things are bad, people don't feel they don't feel any of the good that's actually happening, and that this president is not focused on it. So Democrats should just continue to relentlessly hit on that issue.
Malik, do you anticipate we'll see a shift in strategy from President Trump? Because he, in recent months, has been doing a lot of overseas trips, and we've noted his schedule has not included a lot of domestic trips to sell his policies. And as Herbie has said, that disconnect between maybe what the numbers show, what people are feeling, the only thing that matters is what people are actually feeling about their own wealth. Does the president need to change his strategy?
Well, I think they're already signaling that they're going to have to start focusing on more domestic issues, because we saw Donald Trump had some level of success when it comes to foreign policy. And I think the White House probably reasonably believed that would translate here on the domestic stage. But that's what people are concerned. What's happening here at home, so they're going to have to talk about all of these issues that voters are concerned about.
Herbie, you're talking about Democrats being laser focused on the economy, and yet one of their big focuses is around the Epstein files, to force the government to release all of the Epstein files. Is there a concern among some Democrats that could cloud the message on the economy?
I think there's concern that we don't know what's going on here. These emails have demonstrated something deeply concerning, which is that there was a relationship that went on longer than had been out there, and in a way that we didn't fully know. And what we're seeing now, and I think Democrats should continue to push for, is the release of all these files, because look, in Washington, it is the cover up. It's not the substance. The substance here is deeply disturbing, but at least on the cover up of lobbying members of the Republican caucus to vote no, on meeting with Ms. Maxwell to not speak. This is concerning, and I think Democrats are in the right to be talking about it.
Tia, 30 seconds left. Do you think these files will see the light of day? All of them?
I don't know, but I do think they're going to continue to be a problem for Republicans, because it's an inconsistent message when it comes to the Epstein files.
All right, 10 seconds to you. Is this consuming the presidency?
Yes, and because it's embarrassing.
Okay. All right, guys. Thank you for the great conversation and the succinct final thoughts. Tia, Herbie, and Malik, we appreciate it. Still to come, turmoil and wartime tensions in my interview with Ukraine's new ambassador to the U.S. after a shakeup in President Zelensky's government and Russian gains on the front lines. You're watching Meet the Press now. Welcome back. The battle for control over a key city in eastern Ukraine is escalating as Russian troops look to push deeper into Ukrainian territory. For weeks, Russia has been concentrating its firepower on the town of Pokrovsk in the Donetsk region. Russian media has dubbed this city the gateway to Donetsk due to its strategic location. If Russia seizes control, it would be the largest Ukrainian city to fall since 2023. It comes as President Trump's efforts to negotiate an end to the war in Ukraine appear to have stalled. Joining me now is Ukraine's ambassador to the U.S., Olga Stefanishyna. Thank you so much for being here, Madam Ambassador. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for welcoming me here.
Absolutely. Well, we're honored to have you here. I do want to start off with what the very latest is on the battlefield in Ukraine. Can you give us a sense of where things stand, particularly as it relates to the fighting on the front lines in the eastern part of Ukraine and Donetsk?
Well, we also see that Russia is enormously scaling up its military budgets and scaling up its attacks to the energy and civilian infrastructure of Ukraine. So these are almost nightly attacks with hundreds of drones. So these are like enormous amount of military operations and expenses, and also trying to speculate on the situation around only one stop of military engagement like Pokrovsk. Also gives us the sense that Russia is trying to communicate this way with American leadership, trying to create the narrative around their victorious engagement. But we read it as agony. So, and I think this is a very right time when President Trump has enforced the sanctions, and in a time of this agony is the best time to put more pressure on their economy.
I want to unpack all of that, but I do want to follow up with you. You raised Pokrovsk, a critical area in eastern Ukraine. Russia has stepped up its fighting there. Will Ukraine withdraw its troops? Will Ukraine cede that territory?
Well, just to be completely fair, just over the last week on the whole territory of active war zone, there was like 1,100 plus military and combat engagements. One of the spots there. So it's big, it's important, and Russia have already faced 5 times more losses than in any other spot of this 1,000 plus. But the narrative created around that is to make it victorious as it's only possible. So it's one of the spots. It's not an easy thing there. They're throwing 5 times more resources and manpower there. And we're standing on, but basically whatever developments will be around Pokrovsk, it will not have a decisive turning point in the whole world, because the front line is really big and the nature of war is really different because of the drone technologies and other stuff.
I do want to ask you about the Tomahawk long-range missiles. Obviously, President Zelensky was here. He was asking President Trump for those long-range weapons. President Trump did not grant them. Do you think there's still a chance you could get the Tomahawk missiles? President Trump was just asked about this recently, and he indicated that it's not heading in that direction.
Well, I think there are like a lot of things in between Ukrainian drones and American Tomahawks. There's like a lot of different capabilities. Some of them are available for Ukraine through procurement and assistance from U.S. Some of them are available from different European allies. But when we're speaking about Tomahawks, I think it's a fair discussion to have, because we have been committed to ending the war, to peace settlement. Even my president, after meeting with President Trump, have been public in front of all of his population and all American people that stopping an existing line is an option. So with all of that, the war is still raging on. The attacks are scaling up. So being able to defend our people and impose humanitarian measures by destroying the aggressor's capability is perfectly natural.
You talked about sanctions. Secretary Rubio was asked about sanctions while he was traveling at the G7 summit. I want to play a little bit of what he had to say and get your reaction on the other side.
Well, there's not a lot left to sanction from our part. I mean, we hit their major oil companies, which is what everybody's been asking for. Obviously, those have to be implemented, and it'll take some time to begin to feel it. But, you know, I mean, I don't know what more there is to do. I mean, we're running out of things to sanction in that regard. Well, Shadow Fleet is an enforcement mechanism, and obviously sanctions have to be enforced.
Madam Ambassador, do you agree with that assessment, that there's not a whole lot more to sanction in Russia, or do you want to see sanctions stepped up?
Speaking about two companies which have been sanctioned, there's definitely room for more. And as I've said, the military agony of the Russian war machine shows and should serve as a clear proof that this is the momentum to put maximum pressure on the war machine. We also see the decline by 16% in Russian oil and gas revenue even before sanctions were imposed.
Let me ask you about this current scandal involving President Zelensky's administration. The Ukraine's justice minister was suspended for his alleged involvement in a $100 million kickback scheme in the energy sector. What do you say to lawmakers here in the United States who may view that and say it's a justification for potentially not continuing to send aid to Ukraine?
Yeah, we are, of course, in a contact with a wide group of people from Congress and Senate. We have provided the recent updates. Let me just clarify. These are two members of the government. You know, these are not the people, the people who are directly in president's subordination. But that has discovered a lot of really unpleasant facts. So less than within 24 hours, President requested the resignation of those members of government, and they will be voted resigned next week. They were suspended, and those other people who are covered by an investigation, they are subjected to sanctions. So we are happy at some point that we have a functional administrative institutional capacity, and there is no room for impunity, whether you're close or not close ally to someone. And I think this is where we focus our efforts. It's not a nice thing, but also never in Ukraine's history we experienced that. That means that some things we created are really working.
All right, Madam Ambassador, thank you so much for your time. Please come back again and update us soon.
Thank you for your attention.
And we are back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. There's more ahead on NBC News Now.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.